And welcome to Behind the Headlines, the first Byline Times Behind the Headlines of this new year. And what a quiet beginning, don't you think? Hardeep and Adam, who join me here, our political editor and editor of the website, Adam Bienkov, and our editor-in-chief, Hardeep Matharu. Well, it's nice to start gently, isn't it, after the election of Donald Trump? And not much has been going on social media. It's all been quiet, hasn't it, Hardeep?
Well, we're the three musketeers today, but not in defence of a certain Mr. Musk, who arguably also got elected last November in America, as many people are
we just didn't
commenting.
know it at the time.
Just didn't know it. But yes, gosh, how could we have predicted that the events of, well, last July, when there was a Labour landslide, then there was an expected, win coming for Kamala Harris, which didn't materialise, Trump's return. But I think in the last few weeks, the acceleration of many dynamics between tech, politics, the far right,
racism.
Yeah, and geopolitics between Europe, between the US, not to mention conflicts still ongoing and the impact on that. Yes, could never have predicted that we would have launched back into the new year in somewhat
launched
chaos.
Like Tesla
Chaos.
or a
Disruption.
SpaceX thing that doesn't quite land as you expected with the SpaceX rockets, which comes down and blows up the launch pad.
But lots of disruption.
So
to be
I
sure.
want to ask Adam what he makes of the last bit. Just to say, we'll be talking about the politics of this for the UK and about the media aspects. So, Adam, have you had a nice, relaxing beginning of 2025?
Normally, the start of January is a quite sleepy period politically. We're only a week in, and we're already talking about Trump invading Greenland.
and the Bay of Mexico becoming the Bay of America.
Yeah, and we've got the richest man in the world trying to literally buy out British politics. So it's been an insane start to the year so far, really.
I mean, it started in it. Was that before Christmas? I can't remember. This sort of melee, this I think of it as a cyclotron of craziness on Twitter that he was, or X, that he was offering to fund Farage or the Reform Party 100 million, and there was this company set up, and now he's fallen out. So it happens so quickly on social media. He's fallen out with Farage, hasn't he?
Well, it appears that he demanded that Nigel Farage rode behind Tommy Robinson and potentially brought him within the fold. Nigel Farage initially refused to do so and got a lot of credit from some areas for doing that. However, he seems to be sort of rowing back on that over the last 24 hours. He's now, on his GB News show, he was saying that he's not sure why Tommy Robinson has been kept in solitary confinement, and he's not even sure why he's in prison. So
he hasn't read our laws about contempt of court, I assume. Then
I assume not, and so it does seem like he's rowing back on his supposedly principled objection to Tommy Robinson that he's held over the years.
Maybe worth pointing out to any audience member who's not aware of Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley Lennon, doesn't quite sound so working class, does it? He has multiple convictions for fraud, for affray. He is a criminal. I mean, is in prison now. I don't think there's any risk of defamation of a man whose reputation can't really be tarnished. It's extraordinary that this man is being put forward by Musk, along with somebody else stepped forward who wanted to become Prime Minister of Britain. Did you see that? Somebody else who's actually being investigated for child trafficking, and various other things in Romania. Andrew Tate is
Andrew Tate, yes. There's a lot of grifters that we're going to be talking about over
it's Griftmas.
Yeah, happy Griftmas. But yes, it's quite extraordinary, and the fact that we're even discussing whether or not Tommy Robinson should be in prison, whether or not he's a political prisoner, it just shows how far things are shifting. And there was a briefing today after Prime Minister's questions with Kemi Badenoch's spokesman, and he was asked directly, does Kemi Badenoch believe that Tommy Robinson should be in prison? And he refused to answer that question, said, I'm not going to be talking about Tommy Robinson. It's a completely uncontroversial point. Even if he didn't want to refer to the specific case, he said, anyone who's been convicted should be in prison.
It's called the criminal justice system.
Exactly.
It's called the rule of law.
But this is how sort of terrified they've all become of the sort of wrath of Elon Musk and trying to sort of gain his favour and competing for retweets. I mean, there's a piece of legislation going through the House of Commons today, which is part of which is designed to improve actually protections against child abuse in schools and in the education system. and the Conservative Party are trying to vote it down in order to insert a wrecking amendment on launching an inquiry. But the effect of that wrecking amendment would be to scrap the entire bill if it were to pass. And this is entirely to get the favour of Elon Musk and to get some retweets. It's just remarkable, really.
Just before we go to a bit more detail about the allegations about grooming gangs, there was, and quite the politics of the right, if you like, Let's just dig a little bit down into the report we did, didn't we, Hardeep? It was last May edition. Andrew Kersley did a fantastic series, 4 reports, and you proluded them. And it's about how the far right was exploiting those grooming. Just before we get to that, Hardeep, worth noting, there was a child abuse inquiry, wasn't there, Adam, of which one of the recommendations under the Conservative Party was mandatory reporting. They didn't bring it in, but Labour is. So
yes, I mean, that was launched by Theresa May when she was Prime Minister, and it concluded in 2022, I believe. She had 20 recommendations from the report. None of them in the following years were implemented by the Conservative government. The issue of grooming gangs was not even discussed in Cabinet, according to Nadine Dorries. We heard from Kemi Badenoch's spokesman today that he could not give any examples of her raising it either in the House of Commons or internally, privately inside government. But now suddenly, after Labour have been in for a matter of months, the Conservative Party and the Conservative leader, suddenly this becomes the number one issue in the country. I don't think it really holds up particularly well.
So just going back to that, this has been ongoing for quite a while. In fact, one of Andrew Kersley's reports saying the constant re-upping, weaponisation of historic abuse, especially over where the perpetrators seem to come from an ethnic minority background, has been a key strategy of the right for quite a long time. Can you quickly summarise Andrew's findings there?
Yeah, I'll come on to Andrew's findings. I think what's really interesting about this is taking a step back, because the way we're talking, it'd be really easy to forget that the Labour government was elected by quite a majority just in July. And yet we're in a very different situation, because what's dominating all the headlines and the BBC, the talk radio, the GB News, the papers, is this notion of Keir Starmer being criticised by Elon Musk. It's the grooming gangs at the moment, but there have been a number of other sort of campaigns, I guess, by the media, the farmers' protests, one example, and I guess the context of all of this is important. It's because the Labour government has not enjoyed quite the honeymoon people may have expected it to enjoy, and questions are being asked quite quickly about Nigel Farage and reform and how that might be quite an opposition to Labour in the years ahead. And I think that context is really relevant, because it's that that notion that the Labour government is already on the back foot is allowing a lot of space within the media to sort of narratives that are coming from the right wing, some would argue the far right of politics. And Elon Musk is accelerating all of that, because his talking points and his criticisms of Keir Starmer or any number of other points are feeding into what Farage is saying, what Reform is saying, what the Conservative Party is saying. That then puts more pressure on Keir Starmer. So I've written before about the sort of great noticing that has taken place since there's been a change of government. And I'm sure you can recall the time when Boris Johnson was asked on LBC in 2019. He was asked about child abuse investigations, and he complained about tens of millions of pounds being spaffed up the wall, as he put it. Now, I don't remember that getting a huge amount of coverage and outrage at the time. But also Nigel Farage today in the House of Commons speaking up against this issue, saying he cares about the safety of women. It was only a matter of months ago that it emerged that one of his own MPs, who sat alongside him today, James McMurdoch, was imprisoned in the past for beating up his girlfriend, repeatedly kicking his girlfriend. I don't remember him being particularly concerned about that issue when he was asked about that earlier.
Or Andrew Tate, who he has bigged up, who is actually being prosecuted for child trafficking.
Yeah.
Your point about Labour being on the back foot. I do wonder whether this would have happened anyway. In a way, the precursor for this is the riots, isn't it? Because that was around the similar themes, amped up on X, actually weaponized and actually organized on X and Telegram. And at that point, Elon Musk was saying, it was the anti-migrant, it was the anti-Muslim line. Now we're adding child abuse to it, which is a classic.
Yeah, I think it's really striking that those riots came quite quickly after the Labour election win last July. I do think... the story about Musk goes beyond Musk. It's sort of how the far right are gaining power across the world.
Yeah.
That has been a trend that has been happening for some time. Yeah. What's extraordinary about Britain is two things. In some ways, it appears to be an outlier in that it has elected, arguably a left of centre or sort of more centrist government. Yeah. But at the same time, what it's facing is an onslaught of attacks by the right of politics, the more extreme right of politics. And I think Tommy Robinson is obviously a key figure in all of this. He was a key figure in the riots in terms of, whipping people up.
Organising, organising.
And we've documented that. He's key insofar as saying, we are the media now, Keir Starmer, you better watch out, you're not going to be in power for very long, we have the public with us. These sorts of narratives were happening with the riots. Elon Musk has very much channeled that. And I think it's more than just sort of, and the grooming gangs scandal obviously fits within a wider pattern of how the far right is being amplified, how it's gaining power. That's not to say that scandal wasn't a scandal. Of course it was. But there have been a number of inquiries into it, a number of recommendations which weren't implemented by the Conservative governments over a number of years.
And are now being implemented by the current government.
Yeah.
And also, where they focus on Rochdale and, these specific weather citation, many cab drivers, but there were many other examples of the government report concluded of white organised. And, Catholic Church on some occasions, football clubs in Scotland, it's not exclusively.
The Home Office's own report found that the majority of child sexual abuse is not conducted by perpetrators from an Asian background. I think in terms of on-street grooming, that has, we have seen, gangs of Asian men who've been the perpetrators. But the Home Office's study didn't say that all the perpetrators come from this particular background. And what Andrew Kersley's investigation for us showed last year was that this very issue is being exploited and weaponized by the far right, with the specific example that survivors of child sexual abuse who haven't been supported with ongoing, counseling, psychological support and resources into public services, they have been targeted by far right individuals and groups, offering them money, counselling, just anything to help them. And these survivors then realising later that these individuals or groups are actually sort of using the grooming gangs, Asian grooming gangs, Muslim grooming gangs narrative to further far right aims.
Yeah.
So
can you maybe
much
clarify
more
those aims? Yeah.
And you talked. I do think there's been some amnesia here from the media about how this has all been reported. I think Andrew Kersley's reporting was quite prescient on this. You talked about the riots earlier summer, which we hear very little about in the media in months that have followed. What was it that drove those riots? Overwhelmingly, it was some of these ideas that spread about grooming gangs. It is Islamophobia on the whole. And what we're hearing from Elon Musk now, what we're hearing from the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, we're hearing more examples of Islamophobic tropes. Robert Jenrick tweeted and spoke to the Telegraph and made comments in which he suggested that British Pakistanis, of which there are more than 1 million members of that community in the UK, he described them as coming from an alien and medieval culture. And that's not saying there are some people with medieval and alien views. They're not parts of that culture. The entire culture he is suggesting is medieval and alien. That is an extreme thing to be saying. And it is something that is likely to drive further prejudice against an already reviled minority and to drive potential violence on the streets. And the fact that we're not really talking about this, why is this not why are there not major demands on Kemi Badenoch to sack Robert Jenrick. I repeatedly asked her spokesman today whether she agreed with Jenrick's comments, and he essentially said that she does agree, and that she believes culture is important. But why is this not a major scandal in the way that it would have been, say, 10 years ago under David Cameron?
Yes, or even when Boris Johnson did his famous editorial, the backlash against it with the burqas and the Robert.
Yeah, that was covered a lot more than what we've seen with Robert Jenrick.
And it was mild insult about extreme, if you like, extremely religious Muslims. This is not even talk about Pakistanis. I will not repeat the horrible slur, which was common in the 70s and 80s. You can still hear. Basically, that slur, beginning with P, applied to all people of colour who are Afro-Caribbean. It's a kind of massive... And
it's dehumanising an entire community.
It's powerlism. I mean, it's worse than Enoch Powell. It's saying, and accusing them of attacking children, the most emotive. Even worse than murder, the sort of crimes, the racist sort of depiction of black people as criminals. This is a huge... it's up there with the blood libel. It's up there. It does incite violence. It's extraordinary. Nobody can pick up on this. And this is being driven. I wonder if the wider context is the insecurity on the right. Because we had this sort of moment, don't we? We basically have three fractions, four, maybe, let's go, of the right. So whatever you say about Labour, it's pretty coherent. There's small calls from Blue Labour or something for an inquiry. I wish there'd be an inquiry into the riots, like there was at the Scarman inquiry in the 80s. Big, really important inquiry after the Brixton riots in the 80s. Nothing's happened there. Labour could do that. But Labour, other than that, being quite consistent. What Musk seems to be doing, to me, I don't know how you feel about this, is really getting people competing to his attention and him getting more extreme. He's got self-radicalized. There was this moment, wasn't it, that Starmer blamed social media for the riots, or partially for the riots, instigating them, organizing them. Musk took great exception to that, and he started saying two-tier care, and then these people are being imprisoned just for free speech. Organizing a riot is not free speech. Throwing bricks at a mosque and a policeman is not free speech. Let's just clarify that, Elon. And then it's almost as in a vendetta with Starmer and the government.
Well, Musk was cheering on those riots. I mean, he was actively calling, essentially saying that civil war is coming.
Yeah, inevitable is what he said. And now he is choosing, somebody once says Twitter now, especially with the blue tick accounts, look at verified status. It basically is Stormfront. I mean, it is the most far-right language of Muslims are pedophiles, you're betraying the children that you'd find difficulty finding on Stormfront 10 years ago. So,
but Elon Musk is a member of the new US government. I mean, that's why I think this is a uniquely challenging moment, because it's not just that he's the big media tech baron. He's also in Donald Trump's incoming government. It's very tricky for Keir Starmer's government to outright dismiss him.
Yeah.
I mean, Keir Starmer's comments this week about misinformation and lies that were being spread about the safeguarding minister, Jess Phillips, who Elon Musk said was a rape genocide apologist. Which Jess
that's
Phillips...
the nicest things he said, but he said to Ed Davey.
And she suffered an absolute barrage of abuse.
She said that her security has had to be increased. It's already quite high as a female MP who gets a lot of abuse. But, yes, this notion of Musk is not just a tech media baron. He's not just the ultimate heir to Rupert Murdoch and then some. He's a member of Donald Trump's government. And the MAGA movement is deeply entwined with the far right beliefs, conspiracist beliefs, and beliefs about chaos and disruption. I think it's important that we don't just get too bogged down with Elon Musk as this very colourful character. He's the ultimate meme villain in his own meta world. It's not just about him, it's what's behind him. In some ways, he's the man with the biggest megaphone in the world, channeling and voicing all of this, but there is a movement which is very powerful underneath him, which has been moving for some time. The tricky thing is, I think, as Adam, you allude to, he is sort of setting the tone and calling the shots because of his platform and reach. You're right, the Conservative Party in its comments with regards to any individuals or things he talks about, such as the grooming gangs or Tommy Robinson, it is now watching to see what he does. And I think his unique power is he is a member of the government as well as a media tech baron.
About to be. He's
and
not yet.
that merger, which we've always seen in the UK, is very much there now in the US.
I mean, our domestic media has played a role in this as well. I mean, it's notable that lots of Elon Musk's tweets over recent days and weeks have included links to content from GB News, which itself has been sort of playing off of the comments that he's made. So it's kind of vicious cycle between the two. And
I want to get to the media aspect of it in a moment, because I think that's the crucial thing for us, is because we cover media and watching the supine nature of them towards the social media platforms they used to disparage as echo chambers. But before we get to that, I just want to go a bit more about the politics of this. So the one theory why he's doing this, by the way, is there's two theories actually. One is that he can't sleep. He does take medically prescribed ketamine. And he can't.
He's quite open about that.
It's in his, and he's quite often awake Californian time, just as the news cycle is breaking here, and he wants to have an impact. Another one is there was, and I've always said this, I say this, we say this in our editorial, don't we? That the MAGA, the Trump alliance is a very fractious and difficult one, because though they've all come together on something, they fell out. And a lot of the MAGA, the more nativist Americans, Bannon, a few others said, because Musk wants this visa scheme because he's a migrant. The other guy coming into the DOJ, Department of Government Efficiency, is also migrant. He wants these visas, which is very globalist.
His anti-migrant sentiment doesn't extend to his own company, it seems.
Or other tech barons. Yeah. And so there's a big falling out there. And it seems to me he chooses these moments when he's feeling in a corner. It's very revealing, because I'm not sure how much policy is here, how much of it is driven by by ketamine, by his emotions. It's very emotional, like what he called Ed Davis. Doesn't sound like a sound strategy. So the politics there is very fractious.
For me, it just represents how politics has utterly changed. It's just, as I've written for Byline Times, politics isn't about politics anymore, and Musk is the ultimate representation of that. Because you're right. I mean, there doesn't seem to be anything too coherent about his policy. Yeah. Just after meeting Farage and Nick Candy, he then went against Farage and said he doesn't have what it takes, and Reform Party needs a new leader. There is a lot of chaos and disruption, which Musk is the figurehead for. But I think that's just emblematic of a deeper shift that has happened, which is, as I've written about, it's a mixture of politics not being seen as politics anymore. It's become this channel for people's more emotional, visceral, psychological needs, which aren't being met elsewhere. That, to some extent, has always been the case with politics, but the tech revolution, which is rolling all around us, which Carol Cadwalladr has explained many times to people, is like the revolution of our times, which is too big for us to even recognize. That has changed everything. So now social media allows everyone to exist in their own alternative worlds.
And make money out of it, Hardeep.
And then you have tech merging with politics. Musk is the example of that. He's a member of the incoming US government. And Musk is sowing chaos and division and destruction. And I think it says something about our democracies, where we are at the whim of a man who may be on ketamine, maybe not be able to sleep.
6,000 miles away.
May be emotionally arrogant. Who knows? But the fact that these democracies are at his whim shows that there's something very wrong, and to fix that is there's no simple answer to that.
I don't think we can ignore the sort of role in sort of extreme wealth in this as well. There has been this explosion in the number of billionaires across the world, and the amount of wealth. I mean, I think it's unprecedented, the amount of wealth that Elon Musk has got. And when you have a situation when somebody has so much wealth and has such a reach in terms of his companies, in terms of social media, that there are no restraints on his behavior.
It apparently has no friends either to guide him. Just to focus, because I want to get on the media side of this a bit more later. But just So, why is there nobody to stand up to him on the right? I mean, we've been very critical of Keir Starmer on many occasions, seeming a bit supine, a bit cautious, but he has I think he made a good speech after the riots, and he made a good speech in defense of Jess Phillips. But nobody on the right seems to have a clue. There's no... one of the things we talked was patriotism. We don't want anybody in fear in our elections. Obama says something about you should vote this way. They're up in arms. Is that partly because the money situation? I mean, I haven't seen an oligarch, certain right-wing columnists wouldn't fawn in front of, and Musk is the biggest small. It's also that somehow there is no principle, old conservative principles, even the free market. Musk isn't a free marketeer. He's a monopolist. He has government contracts. This notion of free speech. We always had this idea of free speech. It's like the Americans treat the First Amendment like they treat the Fourth Amendment. They go around shooting people, willy-nilly with free. We always had, decency and decorum and a sense of respect. I thought was conservative values. Who, Adam, on the right, let's say centre-right onwards, apart from people like Dominic Grieve, who've now left the Conservative Party, who's going to stand up for good old British values?
Well, nobody, it seems. I mean, and we've heard a lot over the last 10 years about, since the Brexit referendum, about how important sovereignty is. And where are the people on the Brexit? Where are the Brexit campaigners now speaking up against a foreign billionaire trying to disrupt our democracy, trying to buy our political parties, quite literally in the case of the Reform Party? Where are the Brexit supporting media organisations that are speaking up about this? It's a complete void. I think it is real. I mean, it's opportunism, but it's also, I think, moral cowardice on the part of a lot of these people as well.
Well, there was the whole thing was that we can't be run from Brussels. We're being run by a bunker in Silicon Valley at the moment, wherever Musk happens to be. I think he's moving to Texas.
Well, and Brussels aren't. At no point we're trying to depose democratically elected governments.
He said you should invade. Hasn't he said that? I've heard some MAGA supporters say, yeah, America should invade Britain. After they get to Greenland and then they bypass Iceland, they come and invade the UK to get rid of Starmer. And people in Britain are cheering this on.
But I think it's an opportunity, actually, for the right. If you had somebody with that principle and with the willingness to stand up to Elon Musk and say, "Here's the line and no further. Yeah. This is wrong what you're doing." I think they'd get a lot of credit, I think, from the British public. But there's a real weakness, I think, on the Conservatives, and I think that's embodied by Kemi Badenoch and her senior team as well.
Well, this is like, I think this is, again, not just about Musk, and it's about an existential crisis for liberal democracy. And for a number of years since the referendum, I would say, in this country, the Conservative Party has been shifting more and more to the right. Peter Oborne, our Conservative columnist for the print edition, he has categorised that movement as far right. That's his assessment of it, having been in it for most of his working life.
In the Conservative Party.
In the Conservative Party. So I think there isn't anyone to stand up for it, because that political movement itself has gone so much that way
towards oligarchy and money, because that was how they funded. That's what Peter Oborne's analysis of the festival, wasn't it? That back in the day, the Labour Party and the Conservative, lots of millions, up to 1 million members paying small amount, ran out of money. They went racing after oligarchs, white tie dinners and things like that.
The question, I guess, for Keir Starmer is, if the Conservatives are going along with it and certainly aren't going to question the sort of dangers of Musk and that sort of politics to a liberal democracy, then the obvious argument becomes it has to become Keir Starmer's fight. But in that fight, as we'll go on to discuss, he's up against it, because not only the Conservatives or the right of British politics, but also still to a large extent the media in this country, which is the traditional press, as well as social media and the Wild West, that is, it is very, very difficult, I think, for this government to stand up. But I think that's the real test that's coming.
I mean, I can completely understand the sort of difficulty that Keir Starmer and his team are having over this. He's in an impossible situation. It's entirely the case. But whether or not he wants the fight is coming to him, and he can't really avoid it. I mean, there was, after Prime Minister's questions today, there was a briefing with the Prime Minister's spokesman, and there was quite a few questions about what the government's position is on Donald Trump threatening to take over Canada and Greenland, and they tried to sort of laugh it off. So, no, but this is a serious question. The King of Canada is our king, and this is a threat to the sovereignty.
I forgot that.
Surely the government must have a position on this. Oh, well, we look forward to working with Donald Trump, I think was the...
What, helping him invade it?
Yeah, so, so whether or not they want to have this, they don't want to be talking about any of this stuff. They want to be talking about what they're going to do for the British people, understandably. But they can't avoid it. And I think in for a penny, in for a pound, you have to make your position clear on these issues. And I think he did well this week, but I just don't think that's going to be enough for Keir Starmer.
It's also really difficult because we saw in America, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, their positioning very much was, this is a fight for liberal democracy. They sort of went on that ticket, especially Kamala Harris. We're not going back. We have to keep our democracy. And it didn't win in the election.
People didn't care.
So really interesting. Would that kind of framing work here? Or are people, again, just jaded with politics and, everyone's the same, liberal democracy, maybe we need some disruption?
I think it's about how you frame it. I think you have to frame it as an issue of patriotism. We don't want this interference in our democracy.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way they have to frame it.
I think that's the big difference, isn't it? I mean, Trump win was a shock to us, especially the early indications from somebody is now suing the Iowa poll. But we do understand it. Incumbency, are very fractious. He's a businessman. We talked to cab drivers in New York, didn't we? Said, well, Donald Trump get things done. He certainly is getting things done. But two things. One is, I'll ask you both, neither Farage, though he's more popular, figures like Musk, figures like Tommy Robinson or Andrew Tate, they're not of the scale, the stature, or the historic, celebrity value of Donald Trump. And so these doesn't quite work. But the other factor is, and maybe this is a bigger structural thing, we should look at this one time, because basically since 1945, Britain has said, go along with America. They're the ones with the big stick. They have the nuclear weapons. And as soon as over Suez, Britain did something to France without America's permission. They had to jump back out. Iraq. I mean, Tony Blair's calculation in 2003, the invasion of Iraq, would have been, it's better be wrong with America and right than right with Europe because of the power, because of our Trident submarines, so, the missiles are built by America. Is this also an opportunity, therefore, to break away from that special relationship, so it seems to be slightly codependent, and for us, and build, even if it's not in the EU, better European alliances?
Well, I mean, it may not be a hypothetical question. I mean, Denmark and the United States and the United Kingdom are all members of NATO.
Yeah.
What happens if there is a threat to the sovereignty of a real live threat to the sovereignty of Greenland, which is
from a NATO member?
From a NATO member, where do we stand as members of NATO and supposed allies of both?
Maybe that's why he's doing this. I by the way, none of us seriously believe he's going to invade Canada, Greenland, or anybody who pays
even just by threatening it.
Yes.
It fractures that alliance.
Exactly.
And it breaks down those alliances
and maybe
that kept us safe in the West for so many decades.
And maybe that's the aim. The disruption is to destroy, unsettle. And actually, because he says he doesn't launch wars. So just two things, Hardeep, do you want to look at that? We aren't America. And on that level, MAGA doesn't work here. Wouldn't work. That's what I'm posing to you. And whatever the criticism stick here, Starmer's government, I've not seen any polls, have you, that set for that right-wing fringe who supports Farage are at all persuaded by Musk.
He's deeply unpopular, yeah.
Yeah, he looks like the Mekong. He looks like an evil guy.
Aside from a fraction of the population who is very keen.
Yeah, and so that he's never going to build a coalition. You're never going to build a working coalition to take over the government from that, are you? He's destroying the right. Do you not feel that in a way that one thing Starmer needs to is just hold steady? Let the right fight it out. As I said, the four different factions: Tommy Robinson, Farage, Badenoch, and Jenrick. It seems to me that's the fight is still an ongoing fight between Jenrick and Badenoch, and they're all competing for the same market.
I think for me, it comes back down to some of the conversations we had before the general election last July, talking about whether an incoming Labour government could be truly transformative for the country. And I think what we've seen so far is not that. It is to hold steady, actually, to not challenge too much the status quo. And by that, I don't mean the entire liberal establishment. I just mean in terms of sort of bread and butter principles that we thought would be looked at as soon as the Labour government came to power, such as, you know, party funding, electoral integrity,
internet
issues
regulation.
like this have not happened, least of all media reform and any notion of looking again at press abuses. So I think in some ways it is holding steady, and I'm not sure
that's good enough,
whether that is enough. Because what I always come back down to is, I think you're right in terms of who knows the chaos that will tear all these factions on the right apart. But we should never underestimate or overlook the fact, and it's a fact, that Nigel Farage led a campaign for a number of years in this country. He made it into a mainstream issue. I'm talking about
Brexit.
Our exit from the EU. He took that from a fringe to a mainstream issue. He has openly, on record, told the BBC that the way he did that was by associating immigration with the EU, and he knew if he could associate them, make that a mainstream issue, it would happen. He is arguably one of the most successful politicians of our times. He is a politician. I think he is much smarter, and than we would like to think. And I don't have to agree with his politics. And I'm not sure that some of this chaos isn't already factored in to some sort of wider strategy, which is to sow enough division and to cause enough distraction that enough people in this country will end up with a message that the Labour government came in, they didn't really do anything about all the things they said they'd fix. I have a feeling that in itself is significant for people. We've had it's really cold weather at the moment. We've had the winter fuel allowance cut. I think that has impacted people. Adam, you were saying to me yesterday, a lot of measures that the Labour government wanted to announce around the NHS, the headlines haven't been dominated by that. It's been about Musk and the grooming gangs. So I don't know whether holding steady is enough, because I think we consistently underestimate the powers that be on the right. They are clever. They know how to channel how politics has changed. And I'm not saying this to be pessimistic. I just think it's sort of being pragmatic about it. Because, Farage has been the ultimate successful politician, I would say, in the last decade in this country, if not more.
I think it's an excellent point, Hardeep. And I agree with Peter. I think if you're Keir Starmer and his team right now, you're looking at what's going on with the Conservative Party and Reform and Elon Musk, all rats in a sack. And you're thinking, fantastic, the right-wing vote is going to be split in 5 years' time, and we'll hang on to power. But I think you're absolutely right to put your finger on the fact that we don't know where this is leading, and we don't know by the news headlines being dominated day in, day out, week in, week out by things like grooming gangs and whatever the next big kind of culture war topic. I mean, we spoke a lot about culture wars sort of pre-election, and they didn't really work.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason they didn't really work pre-election is because you had a Conservative government that it wasn't in their interests really. Now you've got a Labour government. A lot of these kind of culture war topics they're a lot more. They can cause a lot more damage to the government because
they're more potent.
You've got a lot more potent. You've got a centre-left government, and you have to also factor in one of the other things that we're not talking about today, really, despite it actually being very significant, is that the cost of borrowing, the cost of gilt, has now gone up to the highest level since the economic crisis in the UK. Now that means at the spending review this year, it's likely that we're going to have the Chancellor, unless they decide to announce a load more tax rises, and they said they're not going to do that, there's going to be significant further cuts to public spending. And so you could have a situation where the UK economy continues to deteriorate. You're having cuts to public services after saying they're going to end austerity. You've got a Conservative Party and a Reform Party attacking them on all of these other issues. And even though the right is split, it then becomes an incredibly hostile political environment for a serving Labour government to survive.
Yeah, and I think sorry, Peter, just last point about this culture wars point. I think it's really interesting, Adam, because in a way, these sort of culture war issues are more potent. We've kind of What has lost traction, perhaps, arguably, is, debates about the Union Jack flag or sort of, diversity, or what the grooming gangs and the riots and immigration. These were always the original culture war issues. I think what we saw in terms of the last Conservative governments and GB News, there was a whole layer of issues that arguably the British public didn't see as priorities.
Well, because they didn't want
like
to,
toilets and things like this.
Well, yeah, because they didn't want to talk about immigration because their record was
Yeah.
Can I, a voice of dissent, right? So
Yes, it's always important, Peter.
and it's good to follow the comparison with America and the UK on this level. So, they stirred up this huge sort of insurrection in August or July, August for the riot, which was kind of, we saw the figures would dry run for what would have been an insurrection had there been a close vote and Kamala Harris got in. It ended up with 1,000 people. Fortunately, nobody injured, property damaged, 1,000 people banged up. And they've gone through the courts, it's whizzed through the courts. Communities came and cleared up the mess after the mosque. And I think the difference is this, and we've talked a lot about this, material wealth and a sense of purpose and cohesion about America compared to the UK. America's doing really well. They don't believe it, but they're doing really well financially. Obviously, it's the average is doing well. A lot of rich people made a lot of money, and the average wage is not that great, and prices are up. But there's a sense of, we talked to Brian Klass, the sociologist and writer, say during COVID how little social cohesion there was in America and how much social cohesion was here. So we're not getting like Trump over here. Trump is going to pardon the rioters, insurrection. And, we don't have that system. I don't think we have that social ethos, the cohesion at a social level.
Cohesion is very strong in the UK compared to other countries around the world. We're actually a model for integration in this country in a way that America simply isn't. So there are reasons to be optimistic.
Yeah, and it's much more ghettoized. It's very difficult these days, I'd suggest, though obviously it's a person of colour, Hardeep, you may disagree, so many people of colour have integrated and spread, so we don't have the ghettos, much more distributed populations, professions. It'd be very hard to get people out with torches knocking on the doors, except this criminal fraternity and far-right group. A lot of them got banged up. The stoking the car, it worked in terms of the EU as an administrative thing, but this is going to quite clear-cut Islamophobia particularly, which a woman in Oldham isn't necessarily going to vote for the way she might have voted for Brexit. Anyway, question.
But I think we sort of have to sort of put to one side the political implications and the kind of social implications.
Yeah.
If you're a British Pakistani living in the UK and you've got the Shadow Justice Secretary saying you're an alien and you're medieval and all the rest of it, and you've got Elon Musk and Reform Party echoing those sentiments, and it's on the BBC every day and it's on the front pages of newspapers, you're going to feel like you're completely under siege. And a lot of that successful integration, despite what you may read in the papers, actually Britain is quite a model for integration. A lot of that does come under threat when you have that kind of environment that people are living in.
Yeah, I also think we've always been a cohesive country by and large. I just think the perception of politics, and particularly on the right, gives the impression of a lot of divisiveness in recent years, and I think that's where the disconnect comes. I know what you're saying, Peter. Is it that the political divisiveness is actually having an impact on the ground?
Yeah.
Perhaps not. I don't know. I haven't got any statistics or evidence to back that up, but I think there's something about even having people in positions of power, such as Robert Jenrick, Kemi Badenoch, Nigel Farage. Let's not forget the reform activists who were filmed undercover by Channel 4 just before the election, calling Rishi Sunak a Paki. And Farage said they're just talking like ordinary folk. Even the fact that these people have status and the privilege of elected office, it's that is in itself problematic if it's not reflective of
but what I'm saying is,
particularly if they get away with saying some of the things that Robert Jenrick says, what's next? The line just keeps getting shifted.
And I couldn't agree with you guys more, but I'm just thinking an essay we wrote before well before the election, maybe 2 years, where Johnson was still in power, about how powerless, oddly enough, put forward by people like Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, was now the de facto default position of the Conservative Party. And Peter Oborne has said
what they're saying now is worse than Rivers of Blood.
It's worse. But the public did reject it, right? And it seems to me that this roils about so quickly. It is like vaporware, it will evaporate. But again, we shouldn't debate. We're not predicting the future, and obviously, and Adam, very good point. Anybody on X, or even watching the BBC, certainly, and let's get to them now, reading the Spectator or the Telegraph, would have every reason to fear, because the kind of Islamophobia peddled by Alison Pearson and Douglas Murray is now mainstream fare. Should we talk about that then? So, Adam, you're going to write for the next edition of Byline Times, which will go to the printers next Thursday and be in the shops a week afterwards. You're going to look at how Musk has roiled the media.
Indeed, and as we've been discussing, you may have expected sort of patriotic media, patriotic newspapers, take back control, return sovereignty to the UK, to be up in arms about this foreign billionaire coming over, trying to buy up our political parties, trying to depose our democratically elected government, elected just last year. Not a bit of it. Anyone looking at the British press, the front pages, in particular papers like the Daily Mail, the Express, and the Telegraph over the last, and the Times to a certain extent as well, the Sun as well today, completely echoing the sentiments of Elon Musk on these issues, repeating his demands on the grooming gang inquiry,
encouraging him to invade, or
not quite to that depth, but it is remarkable that they're so quick to rush to the aid of someone like Elon Musk, who, as we have discussed, is not a popular figure with the British public. So, the old excuse that they're just following what their readers think is not the case in this.
And the language he uses, like against Ed Davey, it is the lowest form of common abuse you expect from an 18-year-old troll, isn't it? He called him a snivelling cretin. I use that offensive term. It's not like Elon Musk is presenting any sort of interesting policies or nuance. You're in these...
And he clearly does not, beyond the politics of this, he clearly doesn't like the UK. He doesn't like the British people. It's obvious in all of his tweets. So where is... the British press makes a lot of it as patriotism and sort of flag waving. Why is it not standing up for the British people and for
It's waving X flags
on our independence?
So you're at these lobby briefings. So what are the when they're questioning the Prime Minister's spokesperson? Are they going, "What's Elon?" Is it just like that? Are they taking his side in all these lobby briefings?
I don't know. The Prime Minister made this speech earlier in the week about all of this, and was condemning Elon Musk, albeit not without mentioning him by name. And he suggested that the Conservative Party were jumping on a far right bandwagon, which, as we discussed, they clearly are doing so.
Far to the right of Enoch Powell.
But a lot of the questions, particularly from the Sun, but other outlets as well, was essentially saying, you are calling, the Prime Minister is calling anyone who is concerned about grooming gangs far right. And some of the questions also became, surely you're suggesting that us, the newspapers, are far right. And of course, they're saying, no, we're not suggesting that. But yeah, it's
schoolboy kind of debating. So it sounds like Harry Cole to me. It's got that air of a...
Well, Harry Cole was the first to make this point, I think, on X. And this was followed up by a press release by the Conservative Party on very similar lines.
Are the other mainstream papers doing this, or is this being led by... Well, the Telegraph is now worse than the Sun, I'd say. It's no longer...
Well, you look at the front page of online of the Daily Telegraph. It's completely dominated by these grooming gangs about Islam, and it's
Musk wars.
It's something that you would be unsurprised to have seen in a sort of far right publication 10 years ago.
Musk has, in many ways, just given these newspapers license to pursue the agenda they always probably wanted to against the Labour government. But he's given them license much quicker and in a more incendiary way, I think. And so they can point to Elon Musk, who's a member of the incoming US government. He's not nobody, he's influential, arguably. And so it's not them bringing up the grooming gangs. It's Elon Musk, who's a politician and a tech media baron, bringing it up. And
The new
it's-
Da
it's
Vinci,
relevant.
according to Tim Montgomery.
Exactly. So this is very, very interesting. Also, Musk, I mean, on a basic level, you know, the reason why Nigel Farage over many years has gained prominence and platforms in the media, he's a colourful character. Like, he's more colourful, or the perception is from the media that he is quite colourful. You know, he goes down the pub, he's a man of the people, he'll say what he thinks. I think certainly with Trump, but also with Musk, you know, he's a colourful character. He spices things up. And it's more interesting to report on what Musk is saying or claiming than it is the NHS waiting times and the priorities of Keir Starmer's government. So I think it's a mix of some venal aims, but also a much darker thing, which is Musk is just providing license for an agenda which was always going to appear eventually with regards to the establishment media and the Labour government. I just think it's appeared much more quickly than we could have expected.
I mean, there's always been a sort of, even before Musk became a sort of the kind of public figure he is now, there's always been a sort of Muskite element of the media. I mean, you look to somebody like Douglas Murray, who declares himself a friend of Tommy Robinson, or has done in the past. I mean, back when David Cameron was Conservative Party leader, the party cut ties with Douglas Murray because he'd worked with the party in the past. Over his comments about Muslims, he previously said that he would like conditions in Europe to be made harder across the board for Muslims. And he's spoken up in defence of Tommy Robinson, so the Conservative Party distanced themselves from him. Now, fast forward to 2025, and you have the leader of the current leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, speaking up in defence of Douglas Murray and saying he will not be cancelled. I'm a big fan of Douglas Murray. And you have that view, which was previously suppressed under a different Conservative leader, now entering the mainstream. And you see the kind of Murray-type articles popping up all over the place, in The Spectator, obviously, but also in the Daily Telegraph, Daily Mail as well. So it's kind of normalisation of something. I mean, we have this idea that we're sort of on a sort of arch of progress, and we're becoming more tolerant, and we seem to be going in the opposite direction when it comes to a lot of these issues.
Yeah, and I think the complexity here is, you know, I don't think Farage would go to the public in the next general election and lead a campaign and stand on a campaign against Muslims. You know, the EU referendum wasn't that explicitly. Implicitly,
the
and
vote leave.
of course, and the Breaking Point poster, it was all there. But I don't think... But what was interesting about it was, you know, explicitly, it was about immigration. It was about immigration and the EU. It wasn't about, look at all the Muslim people coming across from Syria. You know, what I'm trying to say
it's shifted.
is
It's no longer
that
stop the boat.
It's become more explicit, I think.
Yeah, right.
Whereas the kind of Breaking Point poster, there were lots of brown-faced men coming across. But it was not saying, oh, the Muslims are coming.
Right.
Whereas now I think it's become much more explicit.
Yeah.
It's becoming more explicit.
So one of my theories
but
of
whether
that...
Farage is... You know, whether he will rely on sort of the political waters shifting around him. What I'm trying to say is, I think it is becoming more explicit, but I think there's also, it is and it isn't.
No, but EDL, so let's be clear, Tommy Robinson came to fame as a criminal. He had a criminal record leading the EDL, which is specifically Islamophobic party. It wasn't anti-immigration. And by glomming on to him, and that's his historic agenda, which is supported in Russia. He went to Russia. A lot of the propaganda coming out of Putin's regime is Islamophobic. They are heading that way. We'll be developing that bit of that story as we go on. And as you say, you know, the poor people in the front line of this, we have great sympathy with them. Just a bit more on what you made this analogy with Murdoch, because I think beyond the sort of content of Musk's diatribes, the power he has. So it was calculated. I think it might be in the editorial or something, but I wrote about it at some point. Calculated that Elon Musk made enough money just in that one re-election, the 100 billion when Trump was elected, his share prices, he could buy Murdoch 6 times over. And so not only do we have somebody who's infinitely more wealthy than Murdoch, infinitely, not infinitely, I mean substantially more. Rupert Murdoch had to go to the back door in Number 10, as he often did, from Thatcher onwards and Blair, and he went the back door. We found out about it. They didn't want to boast it. Musk is banging the front door. Rupert Murdoch would try to get legislation changed in his favour, whether it's Sky B or VAT or whatever, but he didn't directly, except maybe
set
during
the policy himself.
Set them and take the money. I mean, Elon Musk
And be a member of the government.
has made most of his money from government contracts. So we are seeing, I'm going to sound my intro up a bit, but my first book about Murdoch in 2012, I wrote about the monopoly problem and the influence on the government and the 24th member of the cabinet. I said, but this is nothing compared to the glaring monopolies we see with tech coming. I mentioned Google, Apple, Facebook. I didn't mention Twitter at that point.
And social media monopolies are potentially much larger than the old.
600 million.
Yeah.
And
it's not just Musk. You have Meta as well now backing Trump.
And Meta saying they will also stop. We maybe get onto that truth. Stop fact checking.
Yeah, and there's some other MAGA interests sort of talking about buying up TikTok, and you could have a situation where you have these tech social media sites who are owned by very wealthy billionaires, who every time there's a change of government rose behind the government
and change the facts. They will not fact check anything. They will just put lies.
And they're talking a lot about free speech. It's not conducive to free speech when the main social media platforms, the algorithm is designed and controlled by people who are not just supporters of the government in the United States, but actually a member of that government itself. That is not conducive to free speech.
It's called paid for speech, and literally that's how it works with the verification. If you put provocative content as you get paid, and if you're on the right, and people have mentioned, you get paid a whole lot more. What's your thinking on this, Hardeep?
I think that the other thing that Murdoch didn't do, he's not charismatic.
No.
Man, he's not a meme type villain in his own narrative. He
likes to keep private.
Yeah, it's quite private, and while he owned these newspapers and could make the case that he could reach members of the public and influence them, I think when you have a tech media baron like Elon Musk, who has 211 million followers and has such a public profile through the platform that he owns, it's much easier to make the case that he could directly influence the public in a way that a man who owns newspapers, that's still still removed. And I think Musk also, again, you don't have to like these people to say that they are charismatic. It's charisma isn't just a good type of charisma. It can be an enigmatic charisma. It can be
or an evil charisma.
Yeah, and there is something quite compelling about this entire story in which, Musk knows he's setting himself up as the villain who took over Twitter and, I've taken all these things away from you liberals. This is all something we've never seen before. Rupert Murdoch was nothing like that.
And Murdoch was first and foremost a businessman,
Yeah.
He would support governments of all different colours, primarily from his own sort of business interests.
Yeah.
Whereas Musk, yes, business interests do come into it, obviously, but he is ideologically firmly on the sort of far right of the spectrum in a way that Murdoch was not. Although Murdoch was conservative, he was not anything on the same level.
Therein lies a story which we must explore in the future, because at one point, a bit like Donald Trump, Elon Musk was seen as a bit of a Dem supporter with this. I think what's happened, maybe with this inequality you talk about, Adam, you get these competing elites and a lot of popular immiseration. And also with tech media, everybody's getting radicalized, except, of course, us at Byline Times. Remain steady, sober, and chart a course without extremism, only with pluralism. So I think we can end there, unless you've got some last thoughts.
Yeah, I think my last thought is we do need to always go back to this point that Carol Cadwalder always makes about the tech revolution. I'm still always really surprised by how little, we talk about social media companies, Elon Musk, where's he come from? The context and the joining of the dots in some of the journalism around this. It's because we're going through a tech revolution, an information revolution. That's why there's so much chaos and disruption. That's why social media has been a wild west. That's why we have no idea how our democracies are going to survive the onslaught, and we can't come up with, immediate solutions. We're living through phenomenal change, and it's all around us. And it was our columnist, Chris Gray, in the print edition, he once wrote that it's the revolution nobody voted for. There was no vote where we all elected to have smartphone technology. But it just came because it's the culture that shifts. Yeah. And I think this isn't properly recognized. And I don't blame Keir Starmer for not having a clue what to do about this. It's so much bigger than any of these players. And I think it's just always coming back down to that this is a revolution we're living through. And what does that do to our very concept of truth, which isn't just impacting journalism, it's actually impacting how we live together with politics itself. And these alternative realities that have been made possible, they could be infinite, you know, and people like Musk is handing alternate realities to people on a plate through a platform he has a complete monopoly over.
I mean, it's easy to forget now, but you look back at the dawn of social media in the noughties, it was a very kind of egalitarian vision that this would enable sort of ordinary people to hold the powerful to account. And I think
that'd be good for democracy.
Be good for democracy. And for a while, and I think to a certain extent it did allow people voices who didn't have voices before. Then we had the sort of onset of the algorithm. And the ownership of that algorithm. And instead of being a sort of way to bring voice to the voiceless, it's become a sort of I mean, I think Musk is the embodiment of this now. He's entering government as well. It's kind of a tool of power.
It's like that ring in Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
What's it called? The Ring of
the
Power.
One Ring, yeah.
The one ring. But it is, isn't it? Because you're right, it's a tool of power, the algorithm, who sees what is deemed to be newsworthy, important, relevant, the truth. It is a tool. It's a product of this ring of power, and it seems as if Musk is wearing it.
Twitter is a good example. In its original form, it was kind of a sort of democratic, meritocratic system where if something was popular with the users, it would get more retweets and more shares, and that would rise up the. But now it can be the algorithm can be tweaked, and you only need to go onto Twitter now, which I increasingly rarely do, just to see just a constant stream of sort of far right talking points of lots of people that you don't even bother to follow yourself.
And we use, and in the early days of Byline Times, we very much built our community on Twitter, and we're really happy that a lot of that community has followed us into Blue Sky. But the question is, like, could we do that today, Peter? Do you think?
One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. Well, we'll keep on covering this story as it develops. A cheering thought is in 1998, David Bowie said that the internet is an alien life form. And as we look back at the revolution it caused, something we didn't vote for, a bit like the Gutenberg Revolution, which created the printing press and led to 150 years of religious war in Europe. So we've only got 150 years to go. Meanwhile, we will be carrying on this story. We've also, talking about Rupert Murdoch, there is a looming trial at the end of the month, where for the first time ever, Prince Harry and Tom Watson look set to cause the phone hacking and other cover-ups to come to the High Court. We have a crowdfunder there. If you go to Byline Times or subscribe at bylinetimes.com, and you can help us. And we'll be back a bit more regularly now we've had our Christmas break, and we have some exciting new stories to tell from the Rings of Power. Meanwhile, thank you, Hardeep, for your insights, and Adam, and we'll see you again very shortly. Thanks for watching, and do subscribe to Byline Times.